05:47 a.m., Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk, Virginia. January 14, 2026. 22 vehicles moved in convoy formation from the staging area at Naval Station Norfolk's Auxiliary Gate. No sirens. Headlights off for the first 4 blocks. The convoy included 6 black Chevy Suburbans registered to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, 4 unmarked HSI tactical vans, 2 Norfolk County Sheriff's Transport units, a Treasury OFAC liaison vehicle, and an ATF mobile forensics unit. The remaining vehicles were support. A total of 61 personnel were authorized on the operation order. 44 were armed. The lot was called Tidewater Auto Remarketing Solutions. It occupied 3.2 acres at the industrial edge of the Berkeley neighborhood, 9 blocks from the Elizabeth River. It had a chain-link perimeter, a cinder block office building, 2 hydraulic lifts under a corrugated steel canopy, and 214 vehicles spread across 6 rows on compacted gravel. It had been operating since 2019. It had no prior federal enforcement action on file. The convoys stopped on the service road running parallel to the lot's eastern fence. No movement from inside. The lights in the office were off. The lot's automated security cameras, according to HSI technical records, had been looped on a 6-minute archive feed since 04:52 a.m., a technique that required either physical access to the DVR or exploitation of the lot's IP-based camera firmware, which was running an unpatched version from 2021. At 05:49 a.m., the perimeter team was in position. Bolt cutters on the side gate. 2 HSI agents on the roof of the adjacent warehouse to the north with long lens overwatch. At 05:51 a.m., the gate opened. Retention comp point. The 30-hook resolution tees. What they found inside 9 of those sedans would take 3 federal agencies, 2 classified intelligence consultations, and 1 Treasury sanctions designation to fully explain. The vehicles were logged as salvage title units. Export paperwork had already been prepared for Dubai. Inside the trunk floors, under genuine collision damage, were components that had last been manufactured in a facility outside Tehran. But the story does not start here. It starts 14 months earlier, at a routine desk review in a regional NCIS field office, and with a number that did not match the paperwork it was attached to. The NCIS resident agency for the Hampton Roads area operates out of a building on Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek. It is not a large facility. Its forensic support function, the unit responsible for reviewing logistics anomalies flagged by base contracting offices, had a staff of 9 in November 2024, down from 12 the previous fiscal year due to a hiring freeze. The unit's primary function was not counterproliferation. It was financial fraud review, contractor billing irregularities, procurement kickbacks, the kind of work that generates paperwork and rarely generates headlines. Special Agent Forensic Specialist Dana Rhee had been with the unit for 11 months when the Tidewater file landed on her desk. She was not a veteran case agent. She had come to NCIS from a private sector logistics auditing firm in Arlington. Her clearance was secret. Her access to classified threat databases was limited. What she had was a background in supply chain documentation analysis and a habit, according to colleagues interviewed for this report, of treating anomalies in shipping manifests the way an accountant treats a figure that rounds suspiciously. The Tidewater file was not a case. It was a referral. A base contracting officer had flagged a discrepancy in vehicle export documentation, specifically 3 salvage title sedans that had been purchased at auction by a logistics contractor with base access, logged export to a Dubai-registered trade company, and cleared by a CBP broker whose name appeared on the manifest. The contracting officer's concern was narrow. The sedans were coded under a commodity classification that allowed simplified export licensing, and the declared values seemed low relative to their listed weights. It was a paperwork question, a routine inquiry. Rhee pulled the export manifest. She pulled the auction records from the Virginia Auto Exchange Clearinghouse, which aggregated sales data from 4 regional auction houses, including Tidewater. She pulled the CBP broker's processing history for the past 18 months. She found 23 vehicles exported to the same Dubai entity in a 10-month window. The entity was called College Meridian Trading FZE, registered in the Jebel Ali Free Zone. Its listed business was automotive parts import and distribution. Its registered agent was a law firm in Ras Al Khaimah. Its beneficial ownership was listed as a Panamanian holding company. 23 vehicles, all salvage title. All sedans, 5 different makes, 3 different model years. All processed by the same CBP broker, Marcus Dell & Price, license number 3147229, operating out of a one-person brokerage in Chesapeake, Virginia. All cleared through the same simplified export pathway. Reflagged the volume. 23 vehicles to the same buyer through the same broker in 10 months was not unusual for a functioning auto export operation. It was the weight disclosures that did not add up. The declared weights for the vehicles averaged 340 pounds above their manufacturer curb weights. The discrepancy was consistent across all 23 units. Not random variation. Consistent. She wrote a 4-page internal memo. She attached it to the contracting referral. She sent it up her chain. The memo sat for 6 days before it reached the desk of Supervisory Special Agent Kevin Alterman, the unit chief. Alterman had 22 years with NCIS. He had worked counterintelligence, economic crimes, and 3 overseas deployments to Yukon. He read Ree's memo twice. Then he picked up the phone and called a contact at the ATF's National Center for Explosives Training and Research, specifically the team that had been tracking Iranian drone component procurement signatures since the fall of 2023. The call lasted 40 minutes. Alterman did not take notes during it. He did not have to. When he hung up, he walked back to Ree's desk and told her the memo was being reclassified. He told her she was now read in on something that did not yet have a case number. I spent hours going through the case file, and one detail kept nagging me. The financial structure. The Dubai entity, College Meridian Trading FCE, was not a shell company in the crude sense. It had an operational footprint, a real warehouse in Jebel Ali, real customs filings, real invoices for legitimate auto parts shipments to buyers in Pakistan and Jordan. The sedans were a small fraction of its declared trade volume. Whoever built the procurement architecture had designed it to be invisible inside a functioning business. The automation on the LLC's invoicing system, flagged later by Treasury forensic accountants, processed the falsified vehicle valuations and generated compliant export declarations without requiring human review at the brokerage level. Someone built that system. That person was never charged. The ATF contact Alterman had called was a technical specialist named in court filings only as SA1. SA1's unit had been tracking a fabrication signature, a specific welding pattern used to reinforce trunk floors and wheel wells in standard production sedans that appeared in vehicles recovered from 2 previous interdiction cases. One in Germany in September 2024, involving a Hungarian-registered freight company, and one in Jordan in March 2025, involving a Jordanian customs seizure that was shared with U.S. intelligence through a bilateral agreement. In both prior cases, the vehicles had been used to transport disassembled Shahed 136 airframe components. The drone designation, Shahed 136, refers to a one-way attack munition manufactured in Iran and used extensively in the conflict in Ukraine and by proxy forces in multiple Middle Eastern theaters. The fabrication signature was specific. A series of 4 MIG-welded gussets at standardized intervals along the trunk floor reinforcement rail, combined with a secondary mounting bracket pattern along the wheel well interior that had no manufacturer equivalent in any production vehicle. The pattern was not visible from a cursory inspection. It required either disassembly or a specific X-ray fluorescence scan that could detect the welding alloy composition. The pattern was present in vehicles where the modifications had been made before the collision damage was applied, meaning the damage itself was staged to provide visual cover for the structural alterations. SA1 transmitted the technical signature specifications to RE. RE cross-referenced them with the auction photography records for the 23 Tidewater vehicles. Auction photos were mandatory for title transfer documentation and were taken by a third-party imaging contractor. The photos were adequate: 4 exterior angles, 1 trunk interior shot, 1 engine bay, but not forensic. She was looking at compressed pegs shot with a standard commercial camera. And then the surveillance hit its first wall. Of the 23 vehicles, 17 had already been exported. They were gone, in Dubai, in transit, or beyond practical recovery within the timeline of a domestic investigation. 6 remained in the United States, either at Tidewater awaiting final processing or at a secondary lot in Baltimore that appeared in the auction, records as a partner facility. But the auction photos for 3 of the 6 remaining vehicles were degraded. File corruption in the auction house imaging system, logged as a routine technical issue in October 2025, had rendered the trunk interior photographs non-recoverable. Without those photos, RE could not establish the presence of the fabrication signature through open-source documentation alone. The solution was not elegant, but it was fast. Alterman arranged through a liaison at Naval Station Norfolk's security office for a legitimate reason to physically inspect the vehicles, a base contracting compliance audit related to the original flagged referral. 2 NCIS technical agents from the Forensic Vehicle Unit at Quantico drove to Norfolk, spent 2 days at Tidewater under the cover of the compliance audit, and documented every vehicle on the lot using a portable XRF scanner concealed in what appeared to be a standard inspection kit. They found the fabrication signature in 9 vehicles. 9 sedans. Not 3. Not 6. 9. Forces stakes bend. The case number was assigned on November 19, 2025. It was immediately joint sealed. The operational security classification meant that the case's existence could not be disclosed to the lot's personnel, to the Baltimore facility, or to the CBP broker. It also meant that the auction house's routine administrative operations, including scheduled vehicle transfers and export processing, had to be allowed to continue without disruption, because disruption would signal to the network that something had changed. 2 of the 9 vehicles had export paperwork already in processing. If those vehicles moved before the investigation had built sufficient legal foundation, they were gone. Alterman made the call to hold. The vehicles would stay on the lot. The export paperwork would be deliberately slowed through what was described in internal communications as routine administrative processing delays, a phrase that in practice meant a CBP officer with knowledge of the hold would find reasons to request additional documentation that the broker would have to respond to, buying the investigation days without triggering formal inquiry. The joint seal brought in 2 additional agencies. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, because the case involved trade-based money laundering and sanctions evasion, both primary HSI jurisdiction. And a Treasury OFAC liaison, because the moment Iranian drone components entered the picture, the sanctions violation exposure triggered mandatory OFAC coordination under Executive Order 13382, which authorizes the blocking of property of weapons of mass destruction proliferators and their supporters. OFAC's role was advisory in the initial phase. They were read in to ensure that any enforcement action would be structured to preserve their parallel administrative sanctions proceedings. The 3-agency joint team established a secure coordination cell at the NCIS field office in Little Creek. The cell had 7 permanent members, Alterman Ree, 2 HSI special agents assigned from the HSI Norfolk resident agent in charge, the OFAC liaison, SA1 from ATF, and an intelligence officer on temporary duty assignment from the Joint Task Force for Defense-Related Counterproliferation. The JTF officers identified in court documents only as IO1. IO1's specific agency is classified. IO1's role was to provide real-time threat context analysis, specifically, to assess whether the airframe components identified at Tidewater were consistent with active Iranian procurement cycles, and if so, what that implied about the timeline urgency of the interdiction. IO1's assessment, delivered verbally to the cell and not reduced to written form until after the raid, was that the components were consistent with a second-generation Shahed 136 procurement cycle that intelligence community reporting had been tracking since early 2025. The significance of second generation in this context was technical. The modifications to the original Shahed 136 design had improved its radar, cross-section, and extended its operational range. The components being moved through Norfolk were not legacy materiel. They were current generation production components. What this tells us about the current state of Iranian procurement is this: the network is not opportunistic. It is engineered. The routing of military-grade airframe components through a Navy-affiliated auto auction in Virginia using salvage title vehicle concealment and a legitimate UAE trading company as the export node required advanced knowledge of U.S. export control enforcement gaps, access to modified vehicles at the point of manufacture or early distribution, and a financial structure sophisticated enough to process $87 million in transactions without triggering automated AML alerts at the correspondent banks involved. This does not describe a freelance operation. This describes an institutionalized procurement architecture, one that was likely running parallel channels through other geographic points simultaneously. The surveillance phase, which ran from November 19, 2025, through the first week of January 2026, documented several key developments. First, the two active-duty Navy logistics contractors connected to the lot. Their names in the public charging documents are Petty Officer First Class Jerome A. Wainwright, assigned to Naval Station Norfolk's Logistics Support Command, and Chief Warrant Officer 2 Samuel D. Cush, assigned to the same command. Their roles, per the indictment, were functional. Wainwright had administrative access to the base's vehicle processing system, which allowed him to expedite clearance paperwork for contractor vehicles moving through the lot. Cush had a longer-standing relationship with the lot's owner, a civilian named in the indictment as Terrence Orville Merritt, and had, according to financial records subpoenaed as part of the investigation, received $214,000 in wire transfers from an LLC registered in Delaware over the preceding 18 months. The LLC's name was Coastal Maritime Consulting Partners. Its listed business was Maritime Regulatory Consulting. It had no website, no employees on file with Delaware's Division of Corporations, and a registered agent that also served as the registered agent for 47 other LLCs in the same building. Second, the CBP broker, Marcus Dell & Price. Price's phone and email records, accessed via a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act adjacent warrant whose specific authority is redacted in the public record, showed contact with a number registered to a prepaid handset that was activated in Miami in September 2025 and used exclusively for calls to three numbers: Merritt's personal cell, an unidentified number in the 971 country code, UAE, and a number linked to a money services business in Dearborn, Michigan. Price's financial records showed $330,000 in payments from Coastal Maritime Consulting Partners over a 14-month period. Third, the Baltimore facility. The partner lot in Baltimore, Chesapeake Export Automotive, located in the Curtis Bay Industrial District, appeared in the auction records as an overflow lot for Tidewater. 6 vehicles in the database were listed as stored there, pending transfer to Tidewater for final export processing. The investigation team sought to conduct a physical inspection of the Baltimore lot using the same cover methodology as the initial Tidewater inspection. But when the NCIS technical agents arrived in Baltimore on December 11, 2025, only 5 of the 6 vehicles were on the lot. The 6th, a 2019 Nissan Altima with a New Jersey salvage title, bearing VIN 14BL4EV3KN315772, was not present. The lot manager, when asked, said the vehicle had been picked up for mechanical inspection by a third party 11 days earlier. No paperwork for the transfer existed. The vehicle has not been located as of this report. Retention comp point, 50% mid-roll hook. The investigation had now established the core architecture, a salvage title sedan concealment scheme moving Iranian drone airframe components through at least 2 East Coast auction facilities, facilitated by 2 Navy contractors, a CBP broker, a civilian lot owner, and at least 1 unidentified overseas logistics contact. The financial throughput alleged in the indictment, $87 million in laundered proceeds across 41 drone airframe shipments since June 2025, placed this operation in the top tier of trade-based money laundering cases prosecuted by the Eastern District of Virginia in the preceding decade. What it had not yet established, and what the coordination challenge of January 2026 would make brutally clear, was how many sites needed to be hit simultaneously and whether they could hit them all before the network detected the investigation. The second obstacle materialized on January 6, 2026. A financial analyst at FinCEN, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, who was not read in on the joint operation, flagged a suspicious activity report filed by a Virginia-based correspondent bank. The SAR described a pattern of structured wire transfers from Coastal Maritime Consulting Partners to a series of receiving accounts that matched, in structure, the typology of trade-based money laundering. The analyst, following standard procedure, queried a FinCEN database to determine whether any active federal investigation had already flagged the entity. The database query was logged. Someone at the network saw it. There is a line in the indictment that reads almost like fiction, but it is a direct quote from a text message recovered from Merit's encrypted phone sent to an unidentified contact at 11:43 p.m. on January 6, 2026. It reads something queried us, not law, maybe Fin. 72. The number 72 appears to have been a pre-arranged signal. Within 6 hours of that message, two vehicles at the Tidewater lot, a 2020 Honda Accord and a 2018 Toyota Camry, both on the list of 9 flagged vehicles, had their GPS tracking modules remotely wiped. The NCIS surveillance team monitoring the lot's electronic environment detected the wipe at 2:17 a.m. on January 7. They were not able to prevent it. The wipe created an operational problem. The GPS modules in those two vehicles had been identified as military-grade units, part of the evidence supporting the drone component charges. Without the modules' stored data, the chain of custody linking the vehicles to the broader network was weakened. The forensic team could document the presence of the wipe event itself, and could document that the modules had been physically present and functional as of the previous week's inspection. But the data they had held, location histories, communication logs, firmware versions, was gone. This also meant the network knew, or suspected, that it had been seen. The Alterman-led cell convened an emergency session at 04 a.m. on January 7 in the Little Creek Coordination Facility. The question on the table was binary: execute the raid immediately, accepting an incomplete evidentiary picture on 2 of the 9 vehicles, or hold the planned January 22 date and risk the network moving assets or going dark. We'll say what most won't. The decision to hold the raid date after the database query was right. The incomplete evidentiary picture on the 2 GPS-wiped vehicles was a manageable prosecutorial problem. Moving early, without complete coordination across all 3 agencies, would have been a structural problem. But the reason the database query happened at all, the reason a FinCEN analyst who was not read in on the operation could trigger a query that the network was apparently monitoring, is an institutional accountability question that the post-raid review process has not answered publicly. How did the network have visibility on FinCEN query activity? Who built that capability and when? The charging documents do not address it. The cell's decision, reached at 06:30 a.m. on January 7, moved the raid to January 14, 1 week earlier than planned. Accelerate the coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Eastern District of Virginia on the arrest warrants. 3 warrants for Wainwright, Cush, and Price. Merritt would be detained under a material witness warrant to allow investigators additional time to build the case for a 4th arrest warrant. The Baltimore site would not be raided simultaneously. There were not enough assets, and the missing Altima complicated the Baltimore picture in ways that hadn't been resolved. And there were 2 more vehicles. A pair of 2017 Ford Fusions logged in the auction database as having been transferred from Tidewater to a storage facility in Jacksonville, Florida in October 2025. The Jacksonville vehicles were not physically confirmed at the Florida location. The cell's Jacksonville HSI field office had attempted a welfare check on the storage facility on January 9 and found the unit rented to a Delaware LLC, a different LLC from Coastal Maritime, but with the same registered agent. The unit was locked. A warrant application for the Jacksonville search was filed January 10 and remained pending as of the raid date. Those vehicles were not found. The pre-raid coordination required resolving one final legal problem. The material witness warrant for Merritt required a showing that he was a flight risk, which meant presenting sealed supporting documentation to the magistrate judge without revealing the full scope of the classified intelligence that had informed the operation. The AUSA, the Assistant U.S. Attorney handling the case, worked through the night of January 12 and into January 13 to prepare a filing that used the financial evidence, the surveillance records, and the forensic vehicle analysis as the evidentiary basis for the warrant while keeping the intelligence sourcing under a classified annex. The magistrate signed at 11:20 p.m. on January 13, 2026. If you have followed this case this far, you understand what was on the line. The scale of this operation: 41 drone airframes, $87 million in laundered proceeds, at least 3 auction houses, 2 military personnel, a customs broker, and an overseas logistics chain that the U.S. government has not yet publicly identified, is not an anomaly. It is a case study in a specific kind of institutional vulnerability. Before the raid section, and before we walk you through what happened inside that lot on January 14, if this reporting has value to you, the algorithm needs a signal. A like takes 3 seconds. This is the work that keeps getting harder to fund. Retention comp point, 70% before climax. At 05:51 a.m. on January 14, 2026, the gate at Tidewater Auto Remarketing Solutions opened. The entry team divided into 3 elements. Element 1, 12 HSI tactical officers plus 2 NCIS agents, moved directly to the office building and the cinderblock utility structure adjacent to it. Their objective was to secure the personnel on site and neutralize any document destruction. Element 2, the forensic unit, 6 personnel with cutting equipment and evidence kits, moved to the 9 flagged vehicles, which had been pre-positioned in the lot's eastern section based on the surveillance team's remote camera monitoring from the previous 24 hours. Element 3, Norfolk County deputies plus 2 NCIS agents, secured the perimeter and positioned at the lot's 2 vehicle exit points. The lot had 3 personnel on site at the time of entry. Marcus Dellon Price, the CBP broker, was in the office. He was seated at a desk when agents entered. He did not resist. He asked, according to the entry team's report, whether he should call his attorney. He was told he was being detained, that he had the right to remain silent, and that an attorney would be made available to him. He did not speak again for 4 hours. Jerome Wainwright was in the lot itself, near the hydraulic lift canopy, when agents arrived. He saw the vehicles. He turned and walked toward the rear fence. 2 HSI tactical officers were already on that side. He stopped walking. He raised his hands. He was taken into custody without incident. Samuel Cush was not on the lot. He was located 20 minutes later, at 06:12 a.m., at a Wawa convenience store 1.4 miles from the lot on Military Highway. He was sitting in his personal vehicle, a 2024 Chevrolet Silverado, in the parking lot. He appeared, according to the arresting agent's report, to be on his phone. When the NCIS agents knocked on his window, he unlocked the door. He was taken into custody. His phone, secured as evidence, was found to have placed 2 calls between 05:51 and 06:08 a.m. The first call, lasting 3 minutes and 14 seconds, went to a number in the 786 area code, Miami. The second call, lasting 47 seconds, went to the unidentified 971 UAE number that had appeared in Price's communication records. Both calls are listed in the indictment as overt acts in the conspiracy. Terrence Orville Merritt was not at the lot. He was at his residence in Virginia Beach, where agents serving the material witness warrant found him at 06:02 a.m. He was cooperative, according to the warrant service team's report. He asked no questions. He dressed, without prompting, in clothing suitable for a prolonged period away from home, which the agents noted as consistent with someone who had anticipated this moment. This is where the third obstacle materialized. Element 2 had begun cutting into the 9 vehicles at 06 a.m., starting with the 3 units in the far eastern row, the vehicles whose documentation trail was most complete and whose physical evidence was expected to be the strongest. The first sedan, a 2021 Hyundai Sonata with a Maryland salvage title, opened without complication. The trunk floor was cut on the marked lines. Inside, Packed in acoustic foam panels and wrapped in polyethylene sheeting were 4 disassembled wingskin panels, each measuring approximately 2.1 meters in length, fabricated from a composite material whose fiber weave pattern matched the Shahed 136 fuselage, specification that SA-1 had transmitted to the forensic team as a reference. 2 turbojet engine assemblies, disassembled but complete, wrapped separately. A roll of military specification wiring harness. The second sedan, a 2020 Kia K5, opened similarly. 3 fuselage skins. 1 engine assembly. A sealed aluminum case whose contents, not opened on-site per forensic protocol, would later be identified as GPS guidance module components. The third sedan was the problem. The 2018 Toyota Camry, one of the 2 vehicles whose GPS modules had been remotely wiped on January 7, had additional structural modifications that were not in the forensic team's pre-raid documentation. The modifications were not to the concealment cavity. They were to the vehicle's fuel system. Someone, between the team's last physical inspection in December and the raid date, had rigged a thermal initiator, a commercially available device, commonly used in demolition applications, to the vehicle's fuel tank. The device was connected to a remote trigger circuit. The circuit was live. The forensic team lead discovered this at 06:19 a.m. when she opened the Camry's rear access panel and found wiring that did not correspond to any factory specification. She called it immediately. Element 2 pulled back 20 meters. An ATF explosives detection agent, who had been staged as part of the mobile forensics unit specifically for this contingency, was called forward. The agent assessed the device as low yield but functional. The trigger circuit was battery-powered and used a frequency band consistent with a commercially available remote detonator. A passive RF jammer was already operating on the lot from a unit in one of the HSI vans, standard protocol for high-risk warrant executions involving electronic evidence. The jammer, the ATF agent assessed, was almost certainly suppressing the trigger signal. The device could not be remotely fired while the jammer was active. The assessment took 11 minutes. The ATF agent rendered the device safe by disconnecting the initiator's power supply at 06:31 a.m. The Camry was subsequently opened. It contained 2 GPS guidance modules, intact despite the attempt to destroy them, and 8 carbon fiber sheets cut to airframe panel dimensions. The remaining 6 vehicles were cut open between 06:33 and 07:55 a.m. The full inventory, as later cataloged by the forensic team and listed in the seizure warrant return, included 12 Shahed 136 fuselage skins, 3 turbojet engine assemblies, 4 GPS guidance module packages, 11 carbon fiber airframe panels, 1 roll of military specification wiring harness, 2 aluminum cases of guidance electronics, and documentary evidence, invoices, export manifests, shipping instructions, consistent with an ongoing logistics operation. The on-site work at Tidewater was complete by 09:15 a.m. The 9 vehicles were loaded onto flatbed transporters for transfer to the ATF secure storage facility in Quantico. The evidence totaled, by weight, approximately 1,500 pounds. Retention point, last 60s payoff in open loop. The press conference was held on January 16, 2026. The NCIS director, the HSI acting deputy director, and the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia stood at a podium in a conference room in Norfolk. The statement was 17 minutes long. It described the operation in broad terms. It named the charges. It confirmed 3 arrests, Wainwright, Cush, and Price. It described Merritt as a material witness. It did not mention Baltimore. It did not mention Jacksonville. It did not mention the missing Nissan Altima. It did not mention the identity of the overseas buyer chain, which remains classified. It did not mention the person who built the financial automation system, who was not charged. Jerome Wainwright appeared before a federal magistrate on January 15. He was detained without bail. His defense attorney, in a statement outside the courthouse, said his client was a 22-year Navy veteran who had dedicated his career to his country and would have the opportunity to tell his full story in court. Samuel Cush's initial appearance was also January 15. Bail was denied. His attorney did not make a public statement. Marcus Dellon Price entered a not guilty plea at his arraignment on January 23. His attorney challenged the search warrant for Price's business records as overbroad. That motion was pending as of this report. Terrence Orville Merritt remained under material witness status. He had not been charged as of this report. His attorney told reporters that Merritt was cooperating with federal authorities. The indictment, as unsealed, charges Wainwright, Cush, and Price with conspiracy to violate the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and making false statements to federal customs authorities. The maximum sentence on the EPA conspiracy charge alone is 20 years. The indictment also contains a sealed Attachment B, whose contents are not public. Court filings suggest Attachment B contains the classified intelligence basis for the operation, the threat intelligence linking the components to active Iranian procurement cycles, and potentially the identification of additional network nodes that remain under active investigation. The broader network, as alleged in the indictment, moved 41 drone airframes through 3 East Coast commercial auction facilities since June 2, 2025. 2 of those 3 auction houses are not identified in public documents. 41 airframes. The Shahed 136, in its current production configuration, has an assessed range of approximately 2,000 kilometers. Each airframe, once assembled with guidance components and a propulsion unit, is a functional one-way attack munition. 41 of them represent a significant battlefield capability transfer. The financial throughput, $87 million over approximately 7 months, moved through a correspondent banking chain that involved, according to a Treasury background briefing, attended by journalists with appropriate clearances, at least 4 financial institutions in 3 jurisdictions. The correspondent banks were not charged. Treasury's OFAC office has issued 1 civil penalty finding against a UAE-based money services business in connection with the operation. The amount of the civil penalty has not been disclosed. What's most surprising about this case isn't the components, it's the detection mechanism. A forensic specialist, 11 months into a job whose primary function was contractor billing fraud, noticed that declared weights didn't match manufacturer specifications. She was not running a counterproliferation investigation. She did not have access to the classified threat databases that would have immediately flagged the pattern. She was looking at paperwork. The number that didn't match led to the volume anomaly. The volume anomaly led to the physical inspection. The physical inspection led to the XRF scan. The XRF scan led to SA1. That is how a $87 million Iranian drone procurement network operating inside a Navy-affiliated auto lot in Norfolk, Virginia was found. Not by a fusion center. Not by signals intelligence. By a number that didn't match its paperwork. What do you think? Was this a purpose-built sanctions evasion organization? Or freelance contractors who were recruited into an existing Iranian logistics chain and given the concealment methodology ready-made? That distinction matters enormously for how the network is prosecuted and how the vulnerability it exploited gets closed. The indictment does not resolve it. Neither does the public record. The Baltimore lot, Chesapeake Export Automotive in Curtis Bay, was searched under a separate warrant on January 21, 2026. The 5 vehicles present on the lot were seized. 2 of the 5 had the fabrication signature. The 6th vehicle, the 2019 Nissan Altima, that had not been present since December 2025, was not found. An all-agency alert remains active. The vehicle's last documented location, based on toll records and a single traffic camera hit, was on Interstate 95 northbound near the Delaware state line on December 3, 2025. After that, nothing. The Jacksonville storage unit was searched on January 17, after the warrant application filed January 10 was approved on January 15. The unit was empty. There were marks on the concrete floor consistent with vehicle storage. Tire tread impressions were collected. The 2 2017 Ford Fusions that had been logged in the auction database as transferred to Jacksonville have not been located. The financial automation system, the invoicing and export declaration software that processed falsified vehicle valuations and generated compliant, CBP filings without requiring human review was recovered from servers seized at Tidewater and from a cloud instance associated with Coastal Maritime Consulting Partners. The forensic analysis of that system, conducted by HSI's cyber division, found that the software had been custom-built. It was not a commercial product. It had been coded in a combination of Python and a modified JavaScript framework. The code comments were in Farsi. No one has been charged with writing it. Will this happen again in 5 years? Comment yes or no. The subscribe button is below this video. The financial network in this case, the correspondent banking chain, the UAE trading entity, the 4 LLCs, the money services business in Dearborn, the Panamanian holding company, has not been fully mapped publicly. When it is, we will cover it. Subscribe if you want to be here when they are. The convoys rolled back out of Tidewater Auto Remarketing Solutions at 09:32 a.m. on January 14, 2026. The lot's gate was padlocked with a federal evidence seal. A uniformed security contractor hired by NCIS remained at the entrance. The sign above the office building, a blue-on-white vinyl banner reading Tidewater Auto Remarketing Solutions, buy here, sell here, export ready, was still up. Nobody had taken it down. By mid-morning, the lot's neighbors had noticed the flatbed transporters. One employee at the marine supply company to the north filmed the transports on his phone. The video appeared on a local Facebook group that afternoon. It showed 9 sedans on flatbeds, wrapped in blue NCIS evidence tape. No caption. No explanation. 347 people shared it before any news outlet had filed a single paragraph. The federal charging documents describe the case as ongoing. 3 of the 4 suspects, Wainwright, Cush, and Price, have entered not guilty pleas. The 4th, Merritt, remains a material witness. The sealed attachment B in the indictment suggests additional defendants may be added. The foreign buyer chain remains classified. The missing Altima has not been found. The Jacksonville vehicles have not been found. The person who built the invoicing system has not been charged. The 3 East Coast auction houses are identified in the indictment only as Auction House A, Auction House B, and Auction House C. 2 of them have not been publicly identified. 41 airframes. 3 auction houses. 1 number that didn't match its paperwork.